Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Kim Sajet and I'm the director here at the National Portrait Gallery, so thank you so much for coming for what I think will prove to be a fabulous series of discussions. I was recently asked by someone what I spend most of my time on, and the answer is pretty easy: identity politics. Directing a museum whose mission is to collect the portraits of men and women who have made and continue to make an impact on American history and culture, I find myself in a rather ironic situation where, in theory, it should not be what you look like that gets you into this museum, but what you do. But we all know that that's not true. America has never been able to separate a person's appearance from their potential. Our history is filled, and continues to be, with examples of hatred, discrimination, fear, and alienation on the one hand, and envy, fascination, and appropriation based upon visual appearance on the other. From blackface to whiteface, hijabs to hoodies, male to female and other, to the able and the disabled, history has shown that we're not born with an innate humanity. It is something that must be taught and communicated and created over and over and over again. There was a moment in 1972, on December the 7th to be specific, when it suddenly felt as if the world was going to come together and do away with petty differences and think holistically about what it meant to be human. And that was when astronaut Jack Schmitt on the Apollo 17 took the photo coined the blue marble, and still to date became the most reproduced photograph in human history. As Nicholas Mirzoff in his recent book, How to See the World, pointed out by quoting writer Robert Poole, the blue marble became a photographic manifesto for global justice. Well, that utopian vision feels very, very far away today in the terrifying wake of the most uncivil, mistrustful, racially insensitive, sexually exploitative, factually untruthful, digitally manipulated, secretive and inflammatory election of the modern era. The sad thing is I could have kept going on that list and I just had to stop. Indeed, it's been said to me rather depressingly on more than one occasion in the last few weeks that this symposium on racial masquerade seems very timely. It would have been terribly nice if we were looking back in time at our previous social and cultural transgressions. Instead, we're facing a hurt audience in this auditorium, searching visitors to our museum and a struggling nation. The National Portrait Gallery, as I've mentioned, is all about identity politics, whether it is to defend the label text that says President Eisenhower was cautious on civil rights, or explaining why only 25% of women were historically considered cool, or standing firm on not allowing Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, to be removed from the Smithsonian, or even outlining why we show the portrait of Sylvia Rivera, the transgender activist, in the galleries. However, and I want to give a word of caution, to communicate the ideas, the achievements and challenges behind these biographies via academic neutrality or social politeness misses the opportunity to capture the passion and the personal insights surrounding contemporary events. The Portrait Gallery, and I would say all of us here, has an opportunity, I would say actually a duty, to facilitate open and sometimes difficult conversations about and for Americans today. Therefore, it's my great pleasure to announce the launch of the Centre of Visual Biography, led by Senior Historian and Director of Research and Scholarly Programs, David Ward, who's here somewhere. David, there he is. And you'll hear a little bit more about what we hope to do in my remarks tomorrow. But one of the first initiatives was to reach out to Dr. Gwendolyn DuBois, the Associate Professor of the History of Art at the University of Pennsylvania and Senior Fellow at the National Portrait Gallery, to produce this Richardson Symposium, Racial Masquerade in American Art and Culture. Dr. Shaw received her PhD from Stanford and was an assistant professor at Harvard for 5 years before coming to the University of Pennsylvania in 2005. She is the visual arts editor of Transition and an independent curator. In the past decade, she has helped mount exhibitions at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Institute of Contemporary Art Philadelphia, the Addison Gallery of American Art, the Arthur Ross Gallery at the University of Pennsylvania, and Penn's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. She has also partnered with numerous institutions, including the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Barnes Foundation, and the St. Louis Art Museum, to develop and implement numerous exhibitions, public programs, and other scholarly events. As you can imagine, Gwendolyn has published widely, and some of her books include Represent, 200 Years of African American Art in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Portraits of a People Picturing African Americans in the 19th Century, Seeing the Unspeakable, the Art of Kara Walker, and she's currently working on an investigation of the work of Sargent Johnson. Dr. Shaw has put together a thought-provoking and timely symposium, which I'm very much looking forward to discussing with you all. And I also want to acknowledge the ongoing support from the Edgar P. Richardson Foundation Symposium Fund, which has, in fact, provided the funds for this endeavour. Before I invite Gwendolyn up to the podium, I do want to draw your attention to the Identify performance that will happen tomorrow at 5:30. This is with the local performance artist Sheldon Scott. And believe me when I say it's also going to be visually incredible. The Smithsonian Gardens have been growing 150 rice plants of Carolina gold that will be in his performance in the Kogod Courtyard. So it is going to be, I think, a very beautiful, very elegiac, and rather thought-provoking performance. So, Gwendolyn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Good evening. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you here tonight to the 2016 Richardson Symposium on Racial Masquerade in American Art and Culture. In addition to this evening's keynote, we have 2 sessions planned for tomorrow. The 10 a.m. panel will focus on the visual and performative history of racial masquerade, beginning in the early colonial period and moving up to the present moment. There will be 4 paper presentations followed by a panel discussion for the morning session. And the second session will begin tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. and it will focus on artistic practice and issues of pedagogy surrounding racial masquerade in contemporary art. The day will culminate, as Kim just told us, in a premiere of a specially commissioned piece of performance art by Sheldon Scott. I believe that this will be very exciting and that the discussions should be good, and I'm very happy that you came out tonight. I really want to thank the staff of the Portrait Gallery who welcomed me so warmly and assisted in the organization of this event. In communications and in public affairs, Bethany Bentley and Mary Alba Alvarez. In curatorial, Brandon Fortune, Dorothy Moss, Leslie Urenia, Asma Naim, and the gallery's history department, Jackie Petito, Kate LeMay, and David Ward. It has been a pleasure to work with these last 3 folks in particular through the Center for Visual Biography, which Kim mentioned, as it begins its programming. Jackie, in particular, has been amazing, coordinating all of the logistics for the symposium. Thank you so much, Jackie. Where are you? You are a lifesaver. And it was an honor to work with David, whose important work on the Peel family in particular I have utilized and admired for 2 decades now. Thanks to him especially. And to Kim, your enduring friendship and collegiality since first working together at Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and then at the Historical Society, Pennsylvania, and now here. It's just been fantastic. As you can tell, she is fearless and is guiding this institution, I think, in a really, really exciting direction. A few years back, when she asked me to come to the gallery to work with the staff and to discuss ways of engaging this topic of racial masquerade through the collection, I wasn't really sure what the best way to do this would be. Creating an exhibition, coming out and just kind of doing that, one that would contextualize difficult and often disturbingly racist material within the history of the development of American identity seemed, kind of daunting and potentially perilous to me. And I have kind of a cautious nature. a cautious nature, and a wariness of going blindly into the void. And after extended conversations with Kim, with the curators, with the historians at the gallery, it seemed best to begin with this sort of thing, with a discussion, with a symposium. And I'm grateful that we were able to devote these generous resources for the Edgar P. Richardson, from the Edgar P. Richardson Symposium Fund for the organization. We hope that this would be a way to take the temperature of the field and to see what kind of work scholars and artists were doing in the area of racial masquerade, and also to take the temperature of you, the audience. And I'm glad to see by your presence here tonight and by the fact that we've almost maxed out our registration for the weekend that it is indeed of interest to folks. Now I'd like you to take a look at this picture up here and the one that is on your program for the symposium that we use for advertising purposes. It's a professional studio photograph of the white comedians Freeman Fisher Gosden and Charles J. Correll, who wrote and performed the Amos and Andy show on the radio from 1928 until 1960. In the photograph, which was taken around 1935 and now resides in the collections of the National Portrait Gallery, Gosden stands at right, one hand gripping the lapel of a slightly rumpled suit coat worn over shabby wide-legged pants. A cigar is clamped tightly between his teeth, and his free hand rests authoritatively on the shoulder of Brown, who dejectedly sits behind him on a barrel. Both men have covered their faces and hands with black makeup made of burnt cork, taking care to outline their lips in bright white paint, and each wears a woolly black wig that mimics an African-American hair type. Gosden's eyes peer haughtily down his nose from beneath a bowler hat that completes his all-business outfit of suit coat, collared shirt, and tie. In contrast, Correll is dressed in shirt sleeves and a vest, threadbare trousers and boots, and he wears a comedic hangdog expression, frowning as though deeply weary from the unfair trials that the world has repeatedly set before him. During the 32 years that the show was broadcast, as many as 40 million people, over half of the nation's radios, tuned in each week to hear the adventures of Amos Jones, voiced by Gosden, and Andrew Hogg Brown, voiced by Correll, who were the hapless proprietors of the Fresh Air Taxicab Company of America, Incorporated. After I published a short piece on the website of Smithsonian Magazine this past Monday to help promote the symposium, several people shared some elucidating thoughts about both men, about both my essay and about Amos and Andy. Someone called Sam wrote, quote, "I don't understand why things have to be dredged up about how it used to be. To me, it's like a constant guilt trip put down. If you look all the way back to when we came out of caves, I'm sure every species on Earth have some bones in the closet on how they treated each other. Come on, man, let's move on," close quote. To which another person named Shirky replied, quote, "Please go back to your safe space and stay there. God bless Mel Brooks," close quote. While a third reader identified as R.H. Hardesty confessed, quote, "I had no idea that Correll and Gosden were white." These responses made me very thankful. They made me thankful that as I had begun to consider whom to invite to participate in this symposium, that the first name that came to my mind was our speaker for tonight, Eric Lott. Lott's work, which I reference in the article, has meant so much for our current highly nuanced understanding of the complex history of racial masquerade, and in particular blackface minstrelsy in the United States. Currently a professor of American Studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, Lott has written and lectured widely on the politics of U.S. cultural history, and his work has appeared in a range of periodicals, including The Village Voice, The Nation, The Chronicle of Higher Education, Transition, Social Text, PMLA, Representations, American Literary History, and American Quarterly. He is the author of the watershed landmark, hugely generative 1993 book, Love and Theft, Blackface Minstrelsy and the American Working Class from Oxford University Press, from which the Nobel laureate Bob Dylan took the title for his 2001 album, Love and Theft. A 20th anniversary edition of the book appeared in the summer of 2013. Elspeth Brown praised Love and Theft as a, quote, "masterly study brilliantly argued and elegantly written. It is a powerful and persuasive argument on behalf of interdisciplinary scholarship, and it makes a monumental contribution to the historiography of the antebellum United States. In a nuanced interpretation of the dialectical power and cultural appropriation, Lott analyzes minstrelsy in the process of its own formation, arguing that the minstrel show is less a repetition of black-white power relations than a signifier for them. She writes, minstrelsy for Lott is a cultural form through which the delicate historical processes of antebellum white class and race identity formation can be pieced together. Similarly, Randall Miller lauded the book for its extensive use of, quote, minstrel song sheets and books, performance bills, burlesque sketches, skits and plays, reviews, literary representations and allusions, contemporary illustrations and descriptions of shows and minstrels and remembrances of performers to unravel, as no scholar has done so fully, the complex interlacings of culture, class, race, and even psyche that made blackface minstrelsy so compelling, close quote. It is little wonder why this book helped to propel the field of whiteness studies in the mid-1990s and has continued to be so important to the scholarly examination of 19th century American popular culture and its representational legacies. Lott is also the author of The Disappearing Liberal Intellectual from 2006, a book that rankled historian Russell Jacoby, prompting him to write a notorious review that appeared in the pages of The Nation the following year. Using sarcasm, Jacoby heavily paraphrased Lott in order to express his personal and professional disapproval of the way that Lott writes from a radical egalitarian perspective that celebrates upsurge from below instead of liberal wishy-washiness about class and economic inequality. He squarely calls for a full engagement of the working class hopes that, quote, necessarily involves a long march through the history of African American liberation movements, radical women's uprisings, and other insurrectionary energies, close quote. To which I say, hallelujah. For many of us, Lott's unapologetic pluralist approach to American studies has been both inspirational and totally liberating. Lott's study of race and culture in the long 20th century, his book, Black Mirror, The Cultural Contradictions of American Racism, is forthcoming from Harvard University Press, and I can't wait to buy it. He is a co-director of the Dartmouth Futures of American Studies Institute and a lifetime member of the American Studies Association. And tonight he will be speaking on racial hauntology in the age of Obama. I can think of no better topic to usher us into this last weekend before the presidential election. Please join me in welcoming Eric Lott.
Thank you, Gwen, for that incredibly generous introduction. I was taking notes. It's really amazing. And it's such an honor to be here.
Well, I would...
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, really so honored to be here, and it's really a privilege that I feel very deeply to address you. Thank you very much for coming. It's great to have you to be in your presence. So a presence that involves us being together in that twilight zone between Halloween and the election. Each of them possessing unmistakable characteristics of the other. The age of Obama is coming to a close, and alas, is not likely to outlive his administration. So, a look back at what it has afforded in the realm of racial fantasy, portraiture, representation, which I've called racial hauntology in the age of Obama, and I hope I'll be able to make clear what I mean by that. The election of the first African-American president of the United States occasioned the legitimate return of blackface minstrelsy. All across Barack Obama's first term, the burnt cork snuck back, most notably in comedian Fred Armisen's many Obama impressions on Saturday Night Live, which you must have seen. Heads were scratched. Was this kosher? Armisen had already ventured his version of pop star Prince. His blackface and blind face, New York Governor David Patterson, was a big hit. Before you knew it, Mad Men principal John Hamm was cooning opposite a protesting Tracy Morgan in a spoof of Amos and Andy. On TV's 30 Rock, Jane Krakowski also did some mock blacking up. Fox NFL Sundays, Frank Caliendo blacked up for a broadcast as basketball star Charles Barkley. And Billy Crystal resurrected his blackface Sammy Davis Jr., thing he used to do back in the 80s, for the opening segment of the 2012 Academy Awards telecast. Even Robert Downey Jr. got into the act, however, ironically, using blackface to lampoon a white method actor playing a hard-bitten black GI in the Ben Stiller lark Tropic Thunder, 2008, recalling his father, Robert Downey Sr.'s dubbing of lead actor Arnold Johnson's voice in Downey Sr.'s radical satire, Putney Swope, from 1969. The kitchen heating up, SNL replaced Armisen's Obama during the last election season in 2012 with that of African-American Jay Farrow, whose artificially lightened skin, on top of the inevitable comparisons to his comedic predecessor, only redoubled the minstrel quotient. A state fantasy of what C. Wright Mills once called the new men of power, played out serially on American screens. Earlier in the decade, Dennis Haysbert had laid important representational track for Obama's advancement in his portrayal of Black President David Palmer on Fox's 24, making serious the bid of Chris Rock's conceit in the 2003 film Head of State. With Obama's actual triumph came the conscious restoration of what they used to call Negro minstrelsy. Should the specter of a blackface Obama surprise us? After all, commercial blackface stage performance first appeared at the turn of the 1830s with William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist, in tandem with William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist movement and its paper, The Liberator. Isn't this always the dialectic of racial representation in America? It's never clear in any case what the relation is between off-color comedy and advances of color. Counterweights or complementarities? Could Obama in Cork be a backward testament to Americans' investment in a black president? Or are we in the realm of what Jacques Derrida in Spectres of Marx referred to as Hauntology, ontology haunted by a pun on haunting, in which the non-contemporaneity of time, the always out-of-joint unsettledness of temporality, is prey to repetition and ghosted past acts that consort uneasily with present purposes. What Ian Bauckham in Spectres of the Atlantic calls time's heterochronic accumulation, time's piling up. The book I've just finished takes the measure of such contradictions, the cultural contradictions of American racism, as I think of it, with Daniel Bell's cultural contradictions of capitalism very much in mind, where in Bell's work, the desires and pleasures unleashed by capitalist consumption threaten to undermine the very system that gave rise to them. My project explores some of the ways dominant US cultural institutions have relied insistently and repeatedly on a kind of racial symbolic capital, including and above all, blackface masquerade, in the process threatening to betray the racial hegemony that generated such forms, and that they exist in order to maintain. At the very least, revealing it, sometimes destabilizing it. In the case of Zip Coon Obama, a mostly affectionate recreational fantasy works to expose the material and psychic operations of racial symbolic capital itself, operations that Team Obama cunningly deployed to engineer their own success in 2008 and 2012. A crowning instance of what I'm talking about came in a mock movie trailer produced for President Obama's April 2013 appearance at the yearly Washington Correspondents' Dinner. I don't know if you've seen this. These correspondence dinners get more and more hyped and more glitzy and glamorous as the years have gone by. This one was from, I'll recur to more recent ones, but this one was from 3 years ago. Presidential terms being very often chiefly symbolic, Obama's has been no less so, starting with the densely elusive second inauguration that happened to fall on Martin Luther King Day in January of 13. How about that? Inevitably recalling the 1963 March on Washington 50 years earlier. The symbolism radiated across this moment just a few years ago, this moment's array of elusive popular fictions of state, all of them seeming to have some kind of White House resonance. Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, Robert Zemeckis' Flight with Denzel Washington, it's the pilot, Ben Affleck's Argo, awarded the Oscar for Best Picture by Michelle Obama herself, you might recall, live from the White House. Not sure how I felt about that. Catherine Bigelow's Zero Dark 30, Roland Emmerich's White House Down, Lee Daniels' The Butler, Steve McQueen's 12 Years a Slave. They crowded the symbolic thrust of the second term, I think. Steve McQueen's 12 Years a Slave, Ava DuVernay's Selma, and more besides. In the realm of pop symbolic capital, this has been a period that stretches from Beyonce Knowles' halftime performance at the 2013 Super Bowl in New Orleans to D'Angelo's long-awaited album Black Messiah, 2014, to Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, 2015, with its cover featuring the White House lawn crowded with uproarious OGs and beyond. And the actual factual realm of force and violence, punctuated by the notable instances of police harassment and murder in Staten Island, Baltimore, and suburban St. Louis, found Obama in an even more distantly symbolic role, until that extraordinarily immediate, if no less symbolic, June 2015 moment when he sang Amazing Grace in the Charleston church where 9 parishioners had been murdered by a young white supremacist. In any case, this 2-minute correspondence dinner from 2013, this correspondence dinner confection, casts light on all these accumulating dimensions of what Donald Pease calls state fantasy and the state power it mediates and facilitates. So Obama's speaking at the correspondence dinner, and then he says, I'd like to show you this thing that we put together. So introduced by our president himself.
Well, I was thrilled that Lincoln was a success, and as I was thinking about what to do next, in the middle of the night, I woke up and it hit me. Obama. I mean, the guy's already a lame duck, so why wait? Picking the right actor to play Obama, that was the challenge. I mean, who is Obama really? We don't know. We never got his transcripts, and they say he's kind of aloof. So I needed someone who could dive in and really become Barack Obama. And as it turns out, the answer was right in front of me all along. Daniel Day-Lewis. He becomes his characters. Hawkeye from Last of the Mohicans, and Bill the Butcher from Gangs of New York, and Abraham Lincoln in Lincoln. And you know what? He nailed it.
Was it hard playing Obama? I'll be honest, yeah, it was. This accent took a while. Hello, Ohio. Hello, Ohio. I love you back. Look, let me be clear about this. The cosmetics were challenging. I mean, you wouldn't believe how long it takes to put these ears on in the morning. I don't know how he walks around with these things.
But once we had Daniel to play Obama, we had to cap. And I think we've got some pretty terrific performances.
Working with a legend like Daniel is intimidating, but he makes everyone better. You know, without him, I never could have played Joe Biden. Literally. Hi, I'm Joe Biden.
The hardest part, trying to understand his motivations. I mean, why did he pursue healthcare first? What makes him tick? Why doesn't he get mad? If I were him, I'd be mad all the time. But I'm not him. I'm Daniel Day-Lewis.
Well, I was thrilled that Lincoln.
Okay, we open with the deadpan Steven Spielberg recalling how it hit him to follow up his award-winning biopic of Lincoln with Steven Spielberg's Obama. But who on earth to play him? As it turns out, the director says, the answer was right in front of me all along, Daniel Day-Lewis. The actor so brilliant as Hawkeye in Last of the Mohicans, as Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, and most recently as Spielberg's Abraham Lincoln. A quick montage of clips certifies he becomes his characters. And you know what, Chris Spielberg? He nailed it. Cut to Barack Obama being interviewed with the large caption, Daniel Day-Lewis, method actor. The joke has arrived. Was it hard playing Obama? I'll be honest, yeah, it was. As Obama, as Day-Lewis, as Obama. Shots of Obama in the mirror practicing his accent. Hello, Ohio. Hello, Ohio. I love you back. For one thing, the actor avers, the cosmetics were challenging, and almost 200 years of blacking up roll into the picture. After a quick, almost obligatory bit with Tracy Morgan talking about his performance as, who else? Joe Biden, who is sort of the Tracy Morgan of this administration. We're back to Day-Lewis. The hardest part, trying to understand his motivations. What makes him tick? Why doesn't he get mad? If I were him, I'd be mad all the time, but I'm not him. I'm Daniel Day-Lewis. Fade to black on Obama doing his hair and checking his hand gestures in the mirror. In the face of such an astonishing artifact, it's hard to decide. Amazing they thought of it, or obviously overdue. Obama as Day-Lewis as Obama not only doesn't dissolve Obama's blackface nimbus, it perfectly realizes it. There's a white man inside him, white viewers' spectatorial surrogate, looking in the mirror and seeing the black face of power. That face fronts a persona always reflecting on how to get the performance just right according to the dictates of white desire. I love you back. The performance is always just that, an approximation or copy, never true or originary. The cosmetics are challenging. Obama is always already blackface Obama, presumptive imposter in many senses. We've heard this for years now. Not really black, not really left, not really American, not really patriotic. No less than Cornel West has called Obama a Rockefeller Republican in blackface. Why is blackface germane to the charge of crypto-conservatism? Black Republicans do exist. Or is the imputation of fake blackness the real assertion here on West's part? It is consoling both that a white man is inside, pulling the strings, and that he's able to summon the seductive contours of blackness. For great swaths of the Republic, Steven Spielberg's Obama is Obama. Racial ambivalence and state play acting, intact and defining. To follow the thread of West's remark, we love or despise him for knowing just how to play us in both senses. This is just one in a series of what in my book I call the Black Mirror. Black mask from my white face, all the beautiful or demonic attractions of blackness, generated out of 1,000 media sources and ideological state apparatuses, the apparently fundamental precondition for the reproduction of national white selfhood, if not dominance. Whites need that mirror to see ourselves healed, allied in innocence, or angrily disgusted with the symbolic figure, our reliance on whom reveals the violence and guilt we attempt by this means to overcome. For black citizens, certainly other fantasies are in operation. Wielding precisely these scenarios of struggle duly rewarded, Obama carries the mirror as the very fulfillment of self-sustaining misrecognition, ourselves made delusively whole. From the early 19th century era of blackface minstrelsy, at least, we could go back to the Boston Tea Party and the red-faced casters of tea into the bay. At least to the present day, the generation of black images and other self-interested others has crucially buttressed white social and cultural dominance. But even in antebellum days, this could be a risky proposition. And all across the long 20th century, down to our own moment, such black ops have occasionally played havoc with the dominance that brings them about. I began with Obama's interesting mirrors because they indicate how much we are heir to an ongoing racial imaginary structured in dominance. How much that imaginary can occasionally surprise us, not least by producing a black president, and how much its own operations can leave it vulnerable to self-exposure at the very moments it seems most intractable. All of this certainly puts the lie to the notion that our moment is post-racial, a fleeting moment of fantasy now long past. White racial hegemony, fueled by white racial desire, stubbornly refuses to die. It is the latter's unpredictability, as well as its persistence, that interests me here. It clearly interests President Obama as well, about which more in a moment. And the funny thing is how aware of it he has been both before and after being elected to high office, as in this little film. Electorally, he's made this awareness pay off twice, in media gambit and legislative maneuver many times over. This has never, to my mind, and contra Cornel West, involved him somehow cooning or corking up, nor indeed, as West has outrageously claimed of Obama more than once on TV news segments, that he has niggerized the presidency. That's West. It is not that Obama metaphorically dons blackface in his more conservative gestures, as though blackness were essentially leftist and good, or essentially anything at all. The blackface comes in with the contours of white and sometimes black desire, states of American fantasy about our head of state, what artist Kara Walker calls the emancipation approximation. The aforementioned Sammy Davis Jr.'s first autobiography was titled Yes, I Can, I'm sure you remember it, and published in 1965, the year of the Selma marches, the second of which Davis attended. By the time of the 2008 presidential election, Barack Obama had taken a close approximation of the phrase for his campaign slogan, Yes, we can, through the crucial intervening filter of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta's Si se puede. Sammy Davis's very first movie, it turns out, was Rufus Jones for President, 1933, in which a 7-year-old Davis ascends to high office. A Warner Brothers Vitaphone song and dance short from early in the history of sound motion pictures, and according to Davis, shot in Brooklyn, Rufus Jones is a Jim Crow fever dream. Bullied by some kids in the street, Rufus runs for solace to Ethel Waters, who tells him he can be anything he wants to be, even President of the United States. When Rufus drifts off to sleep in her lap, his dream realizes the fantasy. Despite some fine performances by Waters, and indeed Davis, the film is essentially a vehicle for Birth of the Nation-style burlesques of African Americans wielding the sort of political power Barack Obama would assume exactly 75 years later. How interesting, then, that an effigy Sammy Davis would feature in a Saturday Night Live opening skit with Billy Crystal and Obama's signal predecessor, Jesse Jackson, during the latter's 1984 presidential run. 20 October 1984, to be precise. And you can't find it on YouTube, like the only thing you cannot find on YouTube. I don't know why. But blackface may have something to do with it. Think here of Bill Clinton's comparison of Obama to Jackson, in South Carolina no less, during the 2008 primaries, in a desperate attempt to discredit him. Think, too, of Jackson crying in Chicago's Grant Park the night of Obama's first victory. Coming later in the year of Jackson's pitiful Hymietown references to New York City, the bit cheerfully legitimates Billy Crystal's blackface Sammy Davis, even as Crystal invokes and indeed authenticates Davis's famous conversion to Judaism. The skit features a couple of bad jokes about the Republicans, a Yiddish lesson from Sammy Davis Jr., a little duet with Davis and Jackson singing a Vegas version of Paul Simon's 1966 song, Red Rubber Ball, and then live from New York in Yiddish. It's kind of amazing. The charm of the piece, I suppose, inheres not only in Crystal's funny Davis impersonation, but also in Jackson's self-consciously second fiddle status. He's the inadequate student of showbiz and the cultural markers of his fantasized Hymietown. So Jesse Jackson is humbled in this opening segment and forced to pay his respects to the culture he's traduced. But not unlike the dream of a black president in the hands of the brothers Warner, and fully in step with Michael Rogan's well-known analysis of Hollywood racial masquerade in blackface, white noise, this is a charade of amity. Crystal and Jackson mime interracial brotherhood, though Crystal is, in fact, blacked up. They confirm Jackson's political penitence for his anti-Semitic remarks, but do so at the parodic expense of Davis, Davis's earnest Jewishness, and indeed interracialism itself. For sure, Sammy made himself a Rat Pack mascot. But here, any reaffirmation of Jackson's political credibility can apparently come only at the expense of black representation, Crystal's blackface, the imputation of Sammy Davis's Jew face, pretty much the equivocal political dynamic I've outlined thus far. Most insidiously, in the end, the political and representational crisis at hand is displaced onto the terrain of black intra-racial politics, the conflict between blacks and Jews restaged as one between Jackson, the insurgent Democrat, and Davis, the formerly Kennedy turned pro-Nixon man. Just like James Brown, Nixon man. Just here, it would be nice to have a little sense of how President Obama, so often the target of this sort of thing, thinks about such matters. As it happens, we do. Obama's Dreams from My Father, his amazing book of 1995, suggests the president's dialectical cast of mind when it comes to the burdens of racial representation. On one occasion, while a Columbia undergraduate, Obama, he writes, Obama receives a visit from his mother and sister. Paging through the Village Voice, Mom spots an ad and enthusiastically enjoins everyone to see the famous 1959 French-Brazilian film directed by Marcel Camus, Black Orpheus, at a downtown art house. Obama writes, the storyline was simple. The myth of the ill-fated lovers Orpheus and Eurydice set in the favelas of Rio during Carnival. In Technicolor, I'm sure you remember it, in Technicolor splendor, set against the scenic green hills, the black and brown Brazilians sang and danced and strummed guitars like carefree birds in colorful plumage. The sun is not pleased, quite dismayed, rather, by the romantic racialism on screen. Ready to split about halfway through, he turns to his mother. And this is Obama. But her face, lit by the blue glow of the screen, was set in a wistful gaze. At that moment, I felt as if I were being given a window into her heart, the unreflective heart of her youth. I suddenly realized that the depiction of childlike blacks I was now seeing on the screen, the reverse image of Conrad's dark savages, was what my mother had carried with her to Hawaii all those years before, a reflection of the simple fantasies that had been forbidden to a white middle-class girl from Kansas, the promise of another life, warm, sensual, exotic, different. So he despairs over the eternal racial gulf, even amongst kin. As he puts it, the emotions between the races could never be pure. Even love was tarnished by the desire to find in the other some element that was missing in ourselves, which I think is fundamentally what racial masquerade, what we're talking about all across this symposium, is all about. Obama continues, whether we sought out our demons or salvation, the other race would always remain just that, menacing, alien, and apart. For a few days after this, he avoids situations where he might even have to talk to his mother, a remarkable confession. One day, though, she asks if he's planning on visiting his dad in Kenya, about whom she begins to recollect at length, sort of spontaneously. And hearing his mother speak of his father, a deeper feeling settles over him. His mom is still that girl with the movie of beautiful black people in her head, full of misconceptions. But Obama realizes that her love for his father was guileless and unself-conscious like any other love, transformed, if we're lucky, into something firmer. And he says, what I heard from my mother that day, speaking about my father, was something that I suspect most Americans will never hear from the lips of those of another race, and so cannot be expected to believe might exist between black and white. The love of someone who knows your life in the round, a love that will survive disappointment, unquote. Even as that exoticizing girl, she finds her way to real love. Cue Mary J. Blige. Despite the offensive blandishments of Black Orpheus, by way of it somehow, by transcending it altogether, as though that were possible, Obama doesn't venture to say. In any case, that movie doesn't foreclose, and as Obama renders it, may even help afford the commitment across racial lines. The point is that contradictions, even rather dicey ones, like you find in Black Orpheus, in racial representation generally, can provide the conditions for social movement. In this case, the quite literal generation of our current president. The president has in turn mobilized a vast constituency out of these or similar contradictions. Indeed, in a powerful essay, Donald Pease has gone so far as to see in this Black Orpheus episode the origins of Obama's understanding of how to construct a social movement, a collective imaginary resulting in the presidency across racial lines. Obama, Pease argues, found a way to inhabit the breach between romanticized embrace, childlike blacks, and demonizing recoil, dark savages, red state and blue, sovereign and homo soccer, as Giorgio Agamben calls it. Neither the one nor the other, Pease writes, Obama's oscillation between the positions of the sovereign and the homo soccer enabled him to deploy both of the positions within the structuring racist antinomy, the venerated racial prophet, the demonized terrorist, to his political advantage, reworking this seemingly endless oscillation into the energies animating the momentum of his political movement. Converting what Pease calls this Orphic machinery into the precondition for his emergence, Obama impersonates a new iteration of Black Orpheus. Black Orpheus's descent into the underworld fundamentally reworks what Pease has for years been calling the Bush settlement, even as it assumes Orpheus's mythic power to liberate the machinery of state from political impasse, at least for a little while. I think we're kind of stalled at this juncture. Yet if Obama's mother's affective doublenesses, antinomies, strikingly given ambivalent expression in forms like Black Orpheus or blackface, other kinds of representation, if these suggested a template for the president's creation of a national, dominantly white investment in Black Atlantic value from Kansas to Kenya, an investment that put him in the White House, his habitation there has generated its own state contradictions. Symbolic surplus value, racial hauntology, material interest generated out of racial fantasy continue to work in at least two modes. On the one hand, there's Obama's inevitable descent into the underworld governmentality depicted, for one, by Max Weber in his famous essay, Politics as a Vocation. Having political power, per Weber, is a messy business because what grounds it all is force and violence. As Weber puts it, the early Christians knew well that the world is governed by demons and that he who lets himself in for politics, that is, for power and force as means, contracts with diabolical powers. And for his action, it is not true that good can follow only from good and evil only from evil, but that often the opposite is true. Weber writes, whoever wants to engage in politics at all, and especially politics as a vocation, must know that he is responsible for what may become of himself under the impact of commanding a monopoly on the legitimate use of force and violence over a given territory. He lets himself in for the diabolic forces lurking in all violence. So this is one vector that issues in the sort of contradictions that I'm talking about. This is a deal with the devil, and not only are positive ends not guaranteed to follow from good intentions, the means of politics, force, often make wholesome ends impossible. A desperate state contradiction that derives from the Orphic bargain. To put it in the bluntest possible terms, Obama can proselytize about elementary school shootings and gun control, and even mean it, while authorizing the unchecked and unbalanced use of drones, estimated by one review of classified CIA documents for a 14-month period beginning in September of 2010, a long time ago at this point, to have killed 613 people in 114 strikes, many of them children, some of them only best guesses, that is signature as opposed to personality strikes, so-called, as to the identity of their targets. This is something like the political unconscious of Spielberg's Lincoln underwriting the tactics of Tarantino's Django, the gun power behind state power made all too real. Preemptive and not popularly mandated drone strikes, their results more than once exactly the same as that of the Newtown, Connecticut school shootings, are not a casually necessary part of the national defense, but a component of ongoing state-sponsored primitive accumulation. On the other hand, fetishism and misrecognition at the level of racial representation, fantasy's incarnation as film, mediated image, mimicry, masquerade, and more, work in another direction too. I refer to the intensified toll of Black death and damage, much of it at the hands of the state, which has, like a public X-ray in the last few years, open to view a longue durée of racialized state violence at home. The names of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, and many more attest to the character of a regime whose foundational violence extends deeply and broadly beyond the isolated incidents that killed them. Their deaths are, as Ta-Nehisi Coates is only the most recent prominent writer to suggest, not tragic exceptions, but the shape of the norm. The seeming paradox of President Obama steering a regime of Black death evaporates upon consideration, not just of the limits of any single person's power over the state apparatus, but also the likely compensatory nature of police power over Black populations in the age of Obama. Racial fantasy persists in uglier guises, suffusing actual encounters on the ground. In other words, for some, a Black man in the White House produces new intensities of racial anxiety and paranoia, a new haze of hauntology that mediates every encounter between cop and citizen. Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson imagined unarmed Black teenager Michael Brown to have what Darren Wilson described as Hulk Hogan-like power to harm him, necessitating his death by gun. While more garden variety peek at Black citizenly resistance led Sandra Bland's arresting officer to haul her to jail, where she died allegedly by her own hand. The white supremacist who killed 9 worshipers in Charleston's Emmanuel AME Church fantasized more bluntly, "You rape our women and you're taking over our country." To which President Obama responded with an extraordinary counter-fantasy of shooter Dylan Roof as an instrument of God to demonstrate his, capital H, grace, concluding his speech with an unprecedented rendering of Amazing Grace. The ne plus ultra of this tendency came in the form of white Baltimore ex-police officer Bobby Al Jolson Berger, who had planned to perform in blackface, believe it or not, at a 2015 fundraiser for the 6 cops charged in the custody killing of Freddie Gray, until the event was mercifully canceled. Berger claimed for years that his Jolson impersonation, complete with black face paint and a rendition of Mammy, had nothing to do with race. And here he is.
If you see this, after you've once seen it, you'll see that it has none at all, no bearing at all on a racial thing. None. It's just entertainment, period. This is the gooey part.
The sunshine deep, the sunshine well. I don't wear the sunshine best lamp. So lonely when you're all alone. That is when I play Lord wife, when I play weep no woman here. Singing together and when I hear you, I want to be the person that's on time. So we get rid of something low. I know that you promised you once, Johnny, you're calling me on, Johnny. Johnny, I love you, my hero, Johnny.
There's no necessary connection between policing Black life and patrolling the Black image, I suppose, but nor is the connection merely incidental. Again, he was going to do this act that you just saw at a fundraiser last year, a fundraiser for the 6 cops who needed money to defend themselves because they've been charged with capital crimes in the custody killing of Freddie Gray. The ways of state racial fantasy, to sum up all this craziness, are volatile and discrepant, never predictable in their outcomes, and always productive in the sense of having consequences, as opposed to being spare parts on the real motors of history. Okay, heading to a conclusion now. Recent instances of racial masquerade and theatricalization have made it all too clear that as deep as we are into the Obama presidency, the dream of a post-racial America continues to elude us, and was always the wrong dream anyway. There, for instance, was Keegan-Michael Key doing his Obama anger translator, standing next to President Obama at the 2015 Washington Correspondents' Dinner.
Anyway, as always, I want to close on a more serious note. You know, I often joke about tensions between me and the press, but honestly, what they say doesn't bother me. I understand we've got an adversarial system. I'm a mellow sort of guy. And that's why I invited Luther, my anger translator, to join me here tonight.
Hold on to your lily white butts.
In our fast-changing world, traditions like the White House Correspondents' Dinner are important.
I mean, really? What is this dinner? And why am I required to come to it? Jeb Bush, do you really want to do this?
Because despite our differences, we count on the press to shed light on the most important issues of the day.
And we can count on Fox News to terrify old white people with some nonsense. Sharia law is coming to Cleveland, run for the damn hills. Y'all's ridiculous.
We won't always see eye to eye,
Oh, and CNN, thank you so much for the wall-to-wall Ebola coverage. For 2 whole weeks, we were one step away from the Walking Dead. And then y'all got up and just moved on to the next thing. That was awesome. Oh, and by the way, just if you haven't noticed, you don't have Ebola.
but I still deeply appreciate the work that you do.
Y'all remember when I had that big old hole in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, and then I plugged it? Remember that? Which Obama's Katrina was that one? Was that 19, or was it 20, because I can't remember.
Protecting our democracy is more important than ever. For example, the Supreme Court ruled that the donor who gave Ted Cruz $6 million was just exercising free speech.
Yeah, it's the kind of speech like this. I just wasted $6 million.
And it's not just Republicans. Hillary will have to raise huge sums of money, too.
Oh, yeah. She gonna get that money. She gonna get all the money. Khaleesi is coming to Westeros. Watch out! Whoa!
The nonstop focus on billionaire donors creates real problems for our democracy.
And that's why we're running for a third term.
No, we're not.
We're not?
No.
Who the hell said that?
But we do need to stay focused on some big challenges, like climate change.
Hey, listen, y'all, if you haven't noticed, California is bone dry. It looked like a trailer for the new Mad Max movie up in there. Y'all think that Bradley Cooper came here because he wants to talk to Chuck Todd? He needed a glass of water. Come on.
The science is clear. The science is clear. 9 out of the 10 hottest years ever came in the last decade.
Now, I'm not a scientist, but I do know how to count to 10.
Rising seas, more violent storms.
You got mosquitoes, sweaty people on the train, stinking it up. It's just nasty.
I mean, look at what's happening right now. Every serious scientist says we need to act. The Pentagon says it's a national security risk. Miami floods on a sunny day, and instead of doing anything about it, we've got elected officials throwing snowballs in the Senate.
Okay, I think I got it, bro.
It is crazy. What about our kids? What kind of stupid, short-sighted, irresponsible bull?
Whoa, hey!
What?
Okay, no, hey.
What?
All due respect, sir, you don't need an anger translator. You need counseling. So now I'm out of here, man. I ain't trying to get into all this.
Go. Luther, my anger translator, ladies and gentlemen.
So great. A couple points, watching Obama trying not to crack up. You can tell he's, so I guess I should go like this now. Funny as it was to see Obama poking fun at his own habits of composure, it's easy enough to see that this sort of thing resides in just the sort of subjective splitting to two characters, racial ambivalence, disavowal, and condensation that drive the stereotype itself in Homi Bhabha's once classic formulation, the post-racial burdened with the same varieties of racial fixity as the post-colonial. There's even a whiff here of Tambo and Bones style repartee, minstrel show, interlocutor, and end man cutting up. Same goes for the 2016 Washington Correspondents' Dinner last April, featuring John Boehner, in which the president and the former House Speaker plot life after Washington responsibility. Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do now? And Boehner's like, oh, you're going to love it. It's great. The two of them settle into an afternoon screening of the film Toy Story, and Boehner quips that Obama will soon be able to walk right out of the Oval Office singing Zippity-Doo-Dah and work on your tan. President Obama laughs hard. He's in on the jokes, of course, but they're still essentially minstrel gags. Which is perhaps why Obama is departing the presidency with an affective undertow that puts paid to the post-racial bubble of 2008. Older ideas of a black presidency have made a deep return, in my view, more acidic than either Sammy Davis's Rufus Jones or Chris Rock's head of state. I have in mind something closer to bluesman Howlin' Wolf's early 1970s number, Coon on the Moon, which imagines a black astronaut on the lunar surface looking coolly down at all the naysayers. Its corrosive irony almost prophesied deliverance in its desire for white comeuppance. Something of this came through as well in comic Larry Wilmore's Washington Correspondents' Dinner remarks this past April.
Thank you for being a good...
Whoops.
Thank you for being a good sport, Mr. President, but all jokes aside, let me just say how much it means for me to be here tonight. I've always joked that I voted for the president because he's black. And people say, well, do you agree with his policies? And I've always said, I agree with the policy that he's black. I say, as long as he keeps being black, I'm good. People say, what about Iraq? Is he still black? But behind that joke is a humble appreciation for the historical implications for what your presidency means. When I was a kid, I lived in a country where people didn't accept a black quarterback. Now think about that. A black man was thought by his mere color not good enough to lead a football team. And now, to live in your time, Mr. President, when a black man can lead the entire free world. Words alone do me no justice. So, Mr. President, if I'm going to keep it 100, yo, Barry, you did it, my nigga. Did it. Thank you very much. Good night.
Obama pounds back. That's the amazing thing to me. Same goes for when on talk shows in recent months, Obama does his mic drop. Such gestures speak volumes, a revealing glimpse of something closer to Nietzschean ressentiment than any post-racial victory or transcendence. So one last example, one final thing. For me, it all came crashing home at last December's Kennedy Center Honors Show during Aretha Franklin's performance celebrating honoree Carole King. So Carole King's being honored, but it's all about a very complicated situation. Launching into King's You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, Aretha created a moment of near Benjaminian brilliance. I'm going to play the whole thing because it's kind of astonishing.
One, Aretha Franklin.
Looking out on the morning rain, I used to feel so uninspired when I knew I had to face another day. Oh, it made me feel so tired. Before the day I met you, life was so unkind, but you're the key to my peace of mind. Come you make me feel, you make me feel, you make me feel like a natural woman. When my soul was in the lost and found, mighty good man came along to claim it. I didn't know just what was wrong with me to kill his kiss, help me name it. I'm no longer down on what I'm living for. If I make you happy, I don't need you. You make me feel, you make me feel, you make me feel like a natural woman. Feel like a natural woman, yes. Oh, baby, what you gonna be? You made me feel so good inside, and I just wanna be. I wanna get love, man. It makes me feel so.
More with Stephen Cole.
George Lucas looking a little uncomfortable there. Happy birthday, Mr. President. President Obama immediately starts crying, I think, because he feels the incredible heft of the moment. Starting with great authority at the piano, Aretha delivers the first two verses about how a mighty good man came along to lift her spirits and give her peace of mind. Singing all around the beat, adding new lyrical flourishes, Aretha makes it clear that this fine old song has itself been transformed by Obama's ascendancy. And just think about that. The story proposed in the song as sung nearly 50 years ago in 1967, unfinished, a future unwritten until now. The new interpolated words go, he makes me feel, he makes me feel, he makes me feel. And she's looking straight up at President Obama. But it's not a one-way street. Now I'm no longer doubtful of what I'm living for, she sings. And the new urgency I hear in that line is that while Obama's rise has fulfilled Aretha's life, her art helped make his rise possible. Without her and her song paving the way, no Obama. To me, it's a more than plausible suggestion, if that is, we take seriously the historical impact of the arts this symposium undertakes to study. In any case, who could prove Aretha wrong? The coat comes off, Aretha gets happy, the natural woman owns the room. The State of the Union, so explicitly evoked in the song, is very, very good indeed. Aretha's address to the president produces a deep emotional undercommons with no post-racial illusions. A struggle for happiness in the democratic dark. A struggle, you might say, to feel natural at last in a land of masking jokers. Thanks a lot for listening.
Is this one on? Great. Thank you so much, Eric. I'm kind of overwhelmed. There were moments when I teared up out of emotion. You know, seeing a lot of these clips just, you know, it can be so difficult and so cathartic, you know, to move through these. So thank you. This is a really fantastic way to begin things. We have 2 microphones. If people have questions, I'd ask you to come down. I think it would be easiest.
Or just comments, yeah.
Or comments, or you know, feelings about things that you can put precisely and succinctly, which, you know, may not be the easiest thing. But I welcome you to come down to one of the mics. We'll start over here.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciated and enjoyed the talk.
Thank you.
The thing that I was thinking about when we were watching the anger translator clip. Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I was thinking about the fact that both Obama and, I can't remember if that's Key or Peel, but whichever it is, are both mixed race and are both in the medium to lighter range of brown-skinned people. Could you talk about that? I mean, I think that there is something to that the anger translator could really not be a darker person, for example, and that the two of them can do this routine together in a different way than other actors of those kinds of shticks could before. So could you address that?
No, that's very interesting. And you may well be right that it would just be too risky with the darker skinned fellow to venture into that territory. As it is, it seems to project into a second character this kind of angry id of the president so that it can be externalized, visualized, and expunged from the presidential persona. And it's interesting, too, now that you mention it, that he even invokes his anger or lack of anger, even in that Spielberg thing. If I were Obama, I'd be, you know, as Day-Lewis. If I were Obama, I'd be mad all the time. And so there is something about, like, the absence of the apparent void of anger in the black that that has to define the black presidential persona. Otherwise, light-skinned or not, it would just be too threatening to have a black president. An angry black president? Jesus. I just think it's an incisive remark of yours, an insight to see that, that even the extraction of anger from the president into another kind of character itself has to be tamed down by, you know, the skin politics of the lighter-skinned Keegan-Michael Key. That's great.
Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Lott, and thank you for speaking to us, and thank you for your work. So my question has to do with your clip of that Al Jolson.
The cop.
Yes. He mentioned something that touches on my work on the material culture of race, and he said that racial thing. And you know, thinking about that in relation to the Mexican thing, for example, with the vice presidential candidate, I was wondering what sort of material implications your work on the racist hauntology has, the sort of the materiality of race as it relates to, for example, the archives. So that Amos and Andy picture in the Smithsonian's collection. So I was wondering if you could touch on sort of connecting this hauntology, the discursive power, with the material world.
It's a great line of exploration. I'm glad you're doing it. It's fascinating. For me, one thing I think of is what the locution, a racial thing, covers up, like what it refuses to say. And so it's all congealed into thingness. And it's like all the shit that he clearly knows is going on in this performance, but refuses to entertain, but just by calling it a racial thing, like that would be to open up things that he wants to close down with that very performance. So it's thing as a you know, enthingment, you know, like the turning into a thing, like in Marx's analysis of social relations transformed into things that mask all the complexities and social complications that the thing disallows. The actual material thing that I think is at work in that clip is the paint itself. And what does he say as he puts it on his forehead? And here's the gooey stuff, or here's where it gets messy, or something like that. It's like, I'll say. You know, it's like, that's the messiness you don't want to deal with. It's on your face. It's all over your face, man. It's like, really? So at one level, to produce a verbal thingification that disavows complexity, and then to rub it all over his face is a kind of very interesting dialectic.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the comparisons between historical blackface in American performance and what I understand the disability community is now calling cripface, the use of able-bodied performers to portray characters with disabilities?
Not really. But I would guess, I mean, not knowing much about it, I would guess that it partakes of the same kind of capitalizing on the appropriated persona that racial masquerade and racial appropriation does. I don't know what kind of, you know, performative profit you could generate out of cripface, but I bet it works along similar lines, but not totally isomorphic ones. I would also guess that it's not completely, like the politics and the performative force are not exactly the same. You know, there's some other kind of some other kind of dynamic in play. Do you have examples? I'd like to hear more.
Well, just about every theatrical piece and every movie that portrays somebody with disabilities uses an able-bodied performer to portray that person with disabilities. So it's actually so common that we almost don't even notice it.
Yeah. Sorry? Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. For some reason, Tom Cruise comes to mind, as he rarely does otherwise. But, as Ron Kovacs in the wheelchair in Born on the 4th of July. And I think there's like some kind of pull, some kind of I don't know what it is, some kind of undertow of pity that, like the cognitive, like the doubleness. It's like seeing somebody in white person in blackface. To see someone can walk in a wheelchair produces a kind of double vision and makes you feel all the more. It's like if it was just a person who lives in a wheelchair, then well, that's who they are. But this is Tom Cruise, and it's so sad to see him in a wheelchair. I wish he wasn't in front of my face most of the time when he is in front of my face. But you see what I mean? It's like that kind of. I mean, you can see the it's totally ableist politics there. If you can see the Mission Impossible Tom Cruise, even as you see the character played in the wheelchair, then there's that kind of affective tug. Even more is one argument one might make.
I appreciate your talk, but now that I'm this close, I really appreciate your jacket.
You have your priorities straight.
Well, what kind of image are you giving us? That said, I'm curious about the role of class and how class is being formed with these images that you're talking about today. Because it's liberal class that seems to be a liberal, highly wealthy class that seems to be portrayed in a lot of these images that you're showing us. And in your work, and in David Rediker's work, and in Reagan's work, we've talked about either the working class being formed by using the minstrel images, or the Jews getting out of, the immigrants being moved into the white realm and by using the black images. So I'm curious how black image is being used class dynamically here.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Love and Theft argues this, and I've argued for a long time about and it's coming back with commentary around Trump. I mean, it's easy to write off the white working class as just dumb and racist, and I think that's always wrong. And I actually don't think that class analysis is particularly right with respect to Trump. I think that persona, it seems to me, appeals so much more to a kind of lower middle class, scornful, class position, looking down at the working class, like encouraging an identification with Trump in order to look down at those people that they don't want to be. And I think it comes into play in this talk most forcefully with the cop, with the Bobby Berger. And he's performing in what, if you see the longer clip from which those excerpts are taken, it's clearly a kind of working class bar or club in which he's surrounded by cop friends and other sorts of working class types who are really into this. And as ever, you don't see the other pole of the class complications here, but it's a way as Roediger argues in Wages of Whiteness, for, to gain the psychological, and this is DuBois's analysis in Black Reconstruction, for white working class people to get that psychological profit, the psychological wage of not being black. You may be working class, but at least you're not black. And that's with the policing element, you don't have to be, not only are you not black, you're safely not black, you get to police black people and black images if you put on blackface or enjoy it at this club. I just think that there are other kinds of white working class responses to race that sort of don't circulate through this so much. To think in terms of African American class responses is interesting. Seems to me that that anger, even though Key is dressed up, he's got the rings, a little bit, slightly gangster, is a little bit, and so anger is coded as of a lower, so Obama rises class-wise because anger is abjected down into some kind of black working class kind of affect, just for example. But that's a great question.
Hi. I was struck during your talk because today I was actually putting together a talk related to Afrofuturism, and one of the quotes I came across was putting a black face on the future, which I thought was really interesting, problematic double entendre. But I was thinking about the rise of that as a sort of imaginative strategy and the wormhole into the past that Afrofuturism often uses to then reimagine different futures, and that's really culturally had a growth in this period too. And I was just kind of wondering if you'd thought about sort of that futurism in relation to this hauntology and the past coming up in these sort of more traditional historical ways.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Not really, but the temporality question is really at work in what I'm trying to think through here, and it's much more about kind of a sort of melancholia in which those past acts just don't go away. I mean, and it's like, some sort of progress narrative where we're finally beyond blackface. I mean, it's certainly not there yet. And so there's this weird sort of, it's the force of like Octavia Butler's work a lot of the time. It's like that shit is not even past. We are living in it now. It recurs, it cycles through the present all the time, and so I'm not to the future yet. I'm still kind of thinking about the ways in which the past is always kind of circulating through, interrupting, disrupting, marking the present. And I think Obama, strikingly, is too. Those lines from Dreams from My Father, I mean, he could essentially do anything he wants to post-presidency. Gwen and I were talking about this, but he'd be one hell of a cultural studies scholar, wouldn't he? He's pretty good. But the way in which, so it would have been the early 80s when they go to see this 1959 picture, and you would think, or he seems to think in the pages of the book, it's like, glad we're past that. And he looks over at his mother, and she's like deeply in it. She's like so in it. And so that's, I think, it's somewhat at work in his pages as well.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Lott. First and foremost, I want to say thank you. Your work has meant so much to me and has been incredibly encouraging and guiding me in how I look as a scholar at work, so thank you. I had a comment and then a question, and the question was if you could talk a little bit about the visual effective triangulation that's happening in many of those clips, where literally, physically, you have the backup singers singing to Aretha Franklin, and then Aretha Franklin then singing to Obama, and Obama sitting next to Michelle Obama, this interesting triangulation that is happening, or even in the clip with Bob Berger, how the triangulation is working effectively, which you sort of gestured to a little bit ago. And then I would also say, as a scholar, I look at race, the confluence of race, slavery, and disability. So thinking about crip face and blackface working together is something that I often think about. And even within disability studies, I think there is certainly a move to take up the work that people have done around blackface and to then similarly deploy the language without talking about the fact that the white body is almost always thought of as normative in disability studies. So that even when there's a critique of crip face, it's a critique that's happening because a white body with social capital isn't being properly honored.
No, it seems just right. I could say a few footnotish style words to those incredibly insightful comments. You know, Freud's analysis in his joke book, Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious, often does posit this triangulated model of the way the joke structure works. It's completely speculative, can't prove it. It's only sort of true, but it's like, you know, it's provocative. And it's like, and it goes that one person, the unconscious structure of the joke is you tell a joke to somebody about a third person who may or may not be there. And his kind of fundamental kind of model is that it's a joke that is sexual in nature between two men about a woman who may or may not be present in order to embarrass her. Things that each of them would like to say to the woman directly, but don't. They say it to each other. And so it's an incredibly aggressive structure, and it's one that's hierarchical and dominative as well. And I think of that in relation to, for example, the Bobby Berger clip, the cop that you mentioned. Because the third person is the black person that's being applied to his face and who is not there, and it's, I would guess, a white interviewer, and he's speaking to, it's like not. I doubt very much that he would be telling a black person that it's not about. Not about. He can comfortably say to a white interlocutor that this black mask I'm applying in front of you is not. I mean, that is the joke. That is the structure of the joke, and the joke is on the black person who's. An effigy of whose face is being applied to his own. With the Obama thing, it's so complicated because there's also Carole King there. I think that's just right to try and get a sense of all the vectors of response and address that are going on there. Backup singers are, in fact, arrayed around the piano singing to Aretha Franklin. As she sings to Obama, Michelle is standing there, whoops, so that's kind of, but there's no, it's like, what if Michelle Obama's totally into it too. To see the president's responses to Aretha Franklin as he's chewing his gum, probably that anti-nicotine, anti-smoking, is great. He's crying and he's into it, and Michelle's into it, and Michelle and Barack are looking at each other. That's really interesting. So there's that triangulation, like through Aretha, they are connecting. And then there's poor Carole King, who's kind of who wrote the damn song, who, so you got a black Jew thing happening, and then there's poor George Lucas. So yeah, all those relations are extremely interesting and complicated and not fully in play at any given moment. Like they're disjunctive, and some come into view and then depart. Disability stuff sounds great. I do think, I know some work, let's say, on Mark Twain and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, just to cite one of a bunch of different literary, scholarly sorts of usages in which so much work has been arrayed around the binary of black and white and race in particular, while, Huck Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, is full of disability references from either the king or the duke pretending to be deaf to Jim's daughter is deaf. There's a whole tale at a certain point that he goes into talking about how his daughter He didn't realize, he feels so bad because he hits his daughter, he says, because he told her to do something and she didn't obey him. And so he smacks her. And he feels profoundly guilty on the raft, he says, because she was deaf, she couldn't hear him. And so he feels, so it's like it's laced throughout that text. And I know some work that's just starting to take up issues of that kind. So thank you.
Hello, thank you for a really stimulating discussion. And you were speaking a little while ago about the reaction of the white working class and issues of class. At an academic conference very recently, I was in a discussion with a woman who identified as white and said that she could deal with the idea of structural racism, but she felt that we lost folks when we talked about white privilege because she had had such a hard-scrabble life that she felt that it was something that was that denied white suffering, basically. And I've heard that in a context with folks with talking about their kids with disabilities. I have a daughter who's autistic, and people coming up and without me saying anything, saying that, well, my child's life is as terrible as yours, and you shouldn't be here because this is about white disability. And I was really interested in hearing your comments about that whole white privilege, that whole argument, because this woman was saying that you lose white working class people in your argument because you talk about white privilege. So, thanks.
Well, that would not be my argument. And what can I say? It's just the idea of losing them. It's like, let them be lost. I don't know. Go someplace else, Or it's not about arguments anyway. It's about struggle. It's about struggle together in collectives and social movements. Across all of these intersectional lines, it seems to me, where learning happens. So the perfect argument about white privilege or lack of white privilege or who's, hierarchy, it's moral stupidity of trying to argue I'm slightly more privileged than you because, we're, less privileged than, that kind of thing doesn't take you very far, I don't think. And I sense you feeling like somebody who can get the structural racism analysis, but who balks at the critique of white privilege. I sense that you're exasperated with that. I am too. I just don't. That's what structural racism means. And it's like, at the end of the day, when somebody's trying to claim that I'm actually less, they're trying to assert less. They're just trying to make themselves feel better, and that just that's not even a political response, I think, and that's what matters to me. So I find it exasperating too, but it's just it just makes me feel, frustrated and not wanting to even try to convince them because they're clearly interested in something besides learning about the way structural racism works. They're trying to do some other kind of thing. But thanks for that. At an academic, what was the conference? I'm curious. What? American what? Uh-huh. Wow. Yeah, I know, yeah. Yeah, right, put together these categories, right. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for the talk. It kind of just reminded me, I just did an exhibit at American University called It Takes a Nation. And this is my first time picking up a camera, and I decided to do film with my friend Jennifer Gray. And the name of it was called Nothing Has Changed, and we did black and white to kind of show both sides. And I had this one photo that kind of reminded me of your whole speech. It was called Inert Knowledge, and it was these two like black boys, and like I was in the Eastern Market area, and I caught this really riveting photo of these kids just being kind of stuck trying to sell cookies, and they were like invisible. And I met a few well-off white Americans, and they basically, you know, the wife didn't really see it, but the guy, he kind of stopped, and he was like, wow, they're like invisible to us. You know, and she didn't, you know, she didn't want to really see it. She saw it because she knew art very, very well. And she saw it, but he, you know, it kind of stopped him, and it just made me kind of realize how I think it's like a mental, like, blockage of really just accepting, you know, what's happening on both sides. And that's what the photo showed. It showed this stillness and this lack of just taking it in my community, of people being just complacent with it. And then two, it's like these white people that were walking by in the picture, they were just laughing and they were in their own world. And, you know, they didn't see the children trying to sell them cookies. So, you know, it just kind of showed this parallel of just the both sides. You know, it's like both sides. It's like a mental blockage of just people really wanting to see it and just accept it coming from both angles. So I wanted to see, you know, I saw that when I was looking at this, and you were, you know, did a great job at just with the contrast of both sides to me. And it just reminded me of that photo. And I think, do you see a mental, like, is it like a mental or disability among both cultures?
Yeah, that sounds great. It's called Inert what?
Inert knowledge.
Inert knowledge? That's cool. Because that's just right. Yeah, that seems to me like just right, because it is there, you know, and it's I mean, it's there in the visual field, and it's even acknowledged or known at some level, but it just isn't seen or something, you know, and the ways we process, you know, the ways the visual field is processed, you know, according to racial ideologies and racial affects, is just super complicated, and it is precisely inert. That's the crazy thing. It's not like it can't be seen or something. It's right there, and you're seeing it, huh?
It's both sides. It's like
Yeah.
one side, especially in like the African American side, it's another type of privilege out here, and then you have the white privilege. It's the same thing. It's just done in a different way, and I observed it through the photography.
Yeah. Also, just the impulse to intervene in the visual field with a camera on your own part is a fantastic impulse.
It's my first time picking up a camera, too.
It's always a first time. It's always a first time. And for some reason, I want to see them. For some reason, the pictures of Carrie Mae Weems come to mind. Okay, what I was going to say about Carrie Weems is different from this, but because this stuff doesn't, I mean, the pictures I'm thinking of, I mean, Carrie Weems is, if you look at her, yeah, Weems, W-E-E-M-S, great stuff, different style. It's not, like, that's more Roy DeCarava, but she's got this series, and it's like, and it's trying to think about the color field of black pictures. So there'll be like color filters over. She's got one called Blue Black Boy, and it's this beautiful kid, but it's blued or burnt orange girl. And these colors, you know, they sort of exist in nature, but her point is more like the ideological filters of color that stand in the way of sight and insight, you know, and knowledge that remains inert. You know, things that you don't know, not to quote Donald Rumsfeld, but things we don't know that we know. I mean, that's kind of true, right? Things that we don't know that we know. People who don't want to acknowledge the things they do, in fact, know. Bobby Berger knows it's all about a racial thing, but is trying to pretend that it's not. Or structural racism person knows that it's about white privilege, but seeks not to know that, to acknowledge it, right? It's inert. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Doc.
Just pick it up. That's it.
You all will never know. You'll never know. Thanks a lot, Dr. Lott. I have appreciated your work since my early days in undergrad, where you moderated a forum with the incredible Paula McLean and our late beloved Julian Bond.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you.
Were you UVA?
Yes, sir. I was one of Larry Sabato's kids, and I had a few blocks to take for English. I regret not having taken you. I took instead a misanthrope from, I think, Alabama. You probably know the person I'm talking about. She's an author down there. But anyway, well, she is. I mean, you know who I'm talking about, I think.
Sure, I do.
Okay, all right.
I know. I'm trying not to know that I know. Larry Sabato gave $1 million to the university.
I know. And we're trying to give as much to his chair when he retires next year, I think so. Mr. Sabato, in his book, The Kennedy Half Century, talks about a lot of presidents who sort of wanted to model themselves after President Kennedy, sort of Kennedy cool, you know, Reagan to a degree, Nixon maybe not so much, but certainly, you know, Bill Clinton. How does President Obama fit in that archetype? And thank you
Very
again.
interesting. That's fascinating. You know, I like thinking about presidents and presidential personae, and that's a stumper. That's a great question. Do you think he has Julian in mind? More than any, who wants to be any of those guys, you know, that you just mentioned? You want to be Julian Bond, I think. That kind of charismatic, thoughtful, wise, essentially reasonable persona is, I think, what he's going for. And that's Julian Bond to me. Very interesting question. Yeah, how do you do that? I mean, it just makes the job seem all the harder. Like, how do you do this? You know, when, if the hauntological thing is, you know, the whole Derridian thing is true, then there's always some melancholy in the sense of, like, you know, ghosted past that persists in and through the present, not sadness, but, you know, that kind of temporality. Then how do you be a black president? And that's just, you know, just in terms, you know, just like in comportment and persona.
I would just say one thing. I had the pleasure of being invited to the Presidential Medal of the Arts ceremony at the White House. And there was this amazing moment where President Obama mentioned that Morgan Freeman wasn't able to be there, and he was very grateful because he was probably off somewhere playing a black president. And he said, it's really nice that he lets me be the black president in the room. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And on that note, I think...
That is interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah, and we all got the joke. Everybody thought it was hilarious.
There are, well, I mean, you know, it's like, that's the thing, right? Because of structural racism, you have entertainers and you have athletes. Mm-hmm. And those are, and you have, whatever, a few august civil rights figures. But those are the available models. And for him to name Morgan Freeman is very interesting. You know, he's a hell of a performer, President Obama. Like, you know, as he's being a cultural studies scholar, he could also be a great actor. You know, he's terrific in all of these. He's got a great deadpan, you know, it's just like, anyway, I interrupted you.
Well, I was actually going to say, what do you think, Gwendolyn? We wanted to invite you all back for the reception that is up in the Kogod courtyard. So there is a glass of wine in your future, a very near future, and something to eat. So we want to thank you again.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you.